Okay guys, this is the project for today. I initially started looking at it. I haven't gotten too deep, but I decided to pick up the camera because it's one that I've not seen do this before. Details about it: it is a 13 BMW X1 bought at auction, brought to me for basically not starting. As far as what it does, it seems like and sounds like a locked up engine. It is the 4-cylinder N20. They are common to basically have timing chain problems and locking up. I have had quite a few of these come in with faulty engines. I'll get you a shot of what it sounds like when attempting to crank it. Hopefully you can hear that. It's the sound of the starter trying to engage. Hopefully I'll do it one more time. That is all that it does. So naturally, because of how it sounds, first things first, to eliminate any unnecessary testing, I just gained access to the crank pulley and physically gonna see if the engine spins. And to my surprise, it actually does. Fairly normal feeling. So the engine's not locked up. So it kind of makes you think that, well, if the engine's not locked up, the starter sounds like it's maybe at fault. Then, come to find out, a brand new starter has already been installed on this. So, we can pretty much probably say that it's not going to be a starter issue, and it's not a locked up engine. Yet I've not ever seen this before, where it cranks and sounds like it's locked up. Also looks like the alternator has also been replaced. Not sure if due to this issue. Again, this is how I received the vehicle. It was purchased at auction with all this stuff done to it. Something's clearly going on, and I, at this point, have no idea. So I wanted to show you this quick clip of what the engine's actually doing when it's attempting to crank, and when you're hearing that attempt of crank. And I happened to catch this just by mistake, but this is what it's doing when it's attempting. And it's something I've never seen, and it's kind of crazy, but take a quick look at what it's doing. So now naturally, next step, I am going to scan the vehicle. So there is the VIN number. Okay. And once it's done its initial reading, this comes up. Now whenever I see this, it tells me that a used module has been installed. So it's asking you by which basically vehicle order, which is kind of like the build sheet, do you want to go by. Gives you a choice of either the CAS or the FRM. As I showed you, 162. That's this vehicle's chassis number. That clearly is not. So at one point, it looks like the FRM has been replaced. So I will go by this to continue in diagnosis, but I'll do a complete system scan and go from there. So this is what we have come up with. 9 faults in the DME, and so on and so forth. And as far as the DME Trouble codes. Okay, so this one, this one, this one, this one, this one I have set because obviously I have the intake manifold off with the throttle body off and unplugged. There's a Valvetronic one there, power management, a main relay code, and then another Valvetronic code. And just out of curiosity, the fault codes in the FRM just related to some mirror issue. So nothing too crazy standout-ish right now. So I will try to do some research on these fault codes. So we're back at the car now. We know that the CAS, like on most BMWs, does control the starter. But what I will do, and I have saved some of these codes, I am going to delete them and see what comes back. And the only one to have codes is the DME. Naturally, probably, obviously, throttle body, and then we'll see what else. So we have the 4 throttle body codes. Obviously, the map sensor, and then this one that returned. As far as any type of description or information on this trouble code, because I could not find any in the service information that I'm using, I am just gonna kind of go with some of this information here. So let's say this basically monitors Valvetronic system for mechanical stiff movement. So it basically will check for I guess mechanical binding issues, and then obviously check your wiring, perform Valvetronic activation, and or I guess ultimately replace the Valvetronic servo motor, and it's stating also a centric shaft. So what I will attempt to do is see if we can get the Valvetronic adjustment performed. That's under service. And I'm beginning to think or wonder if what we are having is a prevention of starting due to the DME not being happy with Valvetronic. So let's go here. I'll turn back on. Okay. And I actually think I can hear the Valvetronic. Let's see. So conditions for starting, basically the procedure, conditions aren't met. So something is not happy with the DME and the Valvetronic system, and I'm wondering if basically what I am experiencing is the DME keeping itself from running because of it not being happy, possibly a safety issue. So not sure. So just out of curiosity, I wanted to see what the starter circuit looks like when going into this state. So I've got the amp clamp and then the starter control hooked up to the scope. Okay, so I'll pause that. There is the 2 cranking events, or attempt of cranking. And we see the, well, the ripples are going to be from the charger. The blue is the voltage control, and the red is going to be the amperage. And let's see, for at least for in length of time for the attempt of control, 122 milliseconds. But we can Obviously we are getting a start signal. The current jumps up and then it gets cut off. I mean, the only thing, like I said, we can tell from this is that it's the computer doing it. So it's, if not, it would hold this continuous for continuously cranking. It's obviously dropping it out by itself for some reason. So just for an example, and luckily here at the same time, I have this X6 here, which when it came in, it did have some Valvetronic faults. I ended up clearing everything on that. I'm doing separate work and diagnosing on that vehicle, but I cleared it. I cleared the DME fault memory, and right away, this one is present. It is that adjustment fault to frequent code. As you can see, that's where I'm connected, X6, and this one does start and run. Let's see if it will start and run. Even with that fault, this one starts and runs. So let's see, I'm going to reread just in case now that it is running. Okay, still only fault code present, but it starts up and runs. Now, just out of curiosity, nothing too weird there. I am going to unplug it and see what it does when trying to crank. I've not attempted this yet. I just want to see what it does. Okay. Same deal. No change. So there's not much where I can look to try to see any type of data related to the Valvetronic system. There is nowhere here actually to look at. Actually, you hear that? Now the key is off. Now the one thing, this car's battery is just not great, but I did look over to the charger and it wasn't at a crazy low level, and obviously it's in its charging state or mode, and you heard, at least I'm assuming it was coming from there, because from the Valvetronic, because I don't have a throttle body. That sounded like a throttle body, and it's almost to the point where now that's like a worm gear connected to the eccentric shaft, like it was trying to move and it just was binding up. Whether it's the shaft or the motor, I'm not sure, but I think as far as everything that's going on with the Sorta crank, but no crank, no start, I think it's going to be all related to the Valvetronic system. I will attempt to take some Hall sensor readings. There's 5 of them total on this Valvetronic motor, so I will attempt to get a signal of them all while this is in assuming it's a faulted state. I have no idea what I'm supposed to find. I don't have a known good. I will try to compare it with that one, because at least on that one it starts and runs and drives, even though it does have that same one code. Maybe I'll see a difference, who knows. But another thing, the only time it gives a signal is when it tries to create a movement. So that's the only thing I've noticed, but I will capture that and show you guys. So this is what I have, and I want to try to maybe explain as far as what I believe is going on with a little bit of the reading that I did based on the Valvetronic system. I will tell you I have run into Valvetronic issues in the past where simply the trouble code comes up, the vehicle still runs, and you replace the motor without doing the shaft and reset the system, and everything is fine and dandy from there. Kind of like the situation with this guy that has the trouble code, it still runs and drives, and in the past, like I said, I've gotten away with doing the motor. As far as this guy, I don't know if the shaft is seized up or not. We'll definitely have to take a look at that. But what I am seeing electrically, I'm wondering and hoping at least that the motor will take care of the issues. So this here is for the running X6. This one is for the X1. You can tell because you see the ripple from the charger on that and none on this. As far as the channels or where I'm tapped in, there are 5 hall sensors, and so that's what I'm looking at. And on both vehicles, all channels were tapped in to the same exact pin on the motor for all the sensors. These two on the bottom, the red and blue, are located here on this side of the motor, and the rest, the 3 hall sensor, are on this side of the sensor or the motor. If you look at this, the X1, we've got 1, 2, 3, and then the 1, 2. So these 3 are on that same side. And if you look at them, they are all in sync. Basically, let's call it timed the same. And then you've got the 1, 2 on the, I guess, passenger side over there of the motor. And they don't match up with each other, and the red doesn't match up with these. So I noticed that off the bat, and then I went ahead and compared the same signals on the X6. This one, remember, starts, runs, and drives. So you got the 1, 2, 3. Actually, here's 3. So the yellow, purple, and green. Those are the 3 on the driver's side, and then 1, 2, the pins on the passenger side. This vehicle, the 2 that are on the passenger side are in sync. They're kind of timed the same. But the 3, you have 1 that's off, this green one. You have the yellow and purple that are synced the same, but this one is off from this. So we've got 2 different situations now where obviously I know I have trouble codes in both. I have different waveforms on both. So I found this piece of information, and we'll basically just, so 5 Hall effect sensors provide the DME with signals. Of the 5, 3 are used for approximate ID and 2 for detailed classification. So 3 are used for approximate and 2 for detailed. And I'm going to go out on a limb here, and even by the construction or setup of the pinouts location, So you got 1, 2, 3 that are all on that one same side on the driver side. And then you have 1, 2 that are on the passenger side. These 3 I'm going to assume is for the approximate ID. And these 2 I'm going to assume for the detail info. The 2 that are used for detail info are, I would say, correct looking on this X6, as opposed to the 2 detailed are not in sync on the X1. The approximate ones are in good state, it looks like, and the approximate ones are not. Only one of the 3 seems to be not reading or working right. I believe since one of the 3 of the approximate ID ones is faulty, but the 2, I guess maybe more important, detailed info ones are in, let's say, good condition or in sync, is why the X6 probably starts, runs, and drives, but it has a code. This one, with having the approximate ones being reading correctly, but the, let's say, the more important, the 2 not be correct, I'm wondering if that's why that's not starting. As far as why the trouble codes is the same, I'm not sure, and why it's not listed as a sensor performance or type of signal, I'm not sure either. But this is all I have here in front of me. The best thing to do is to, on the X6, replace the motor and take the capture again and make sure all come in sync. And then on this one, same thing, but checking the shaft first to make sure it's not binding. Okay, I've gone ahead and removed the valve cover. And at first glance, obviously it is not the cleanest engine, but it's not the worst. Now that's going to be the eccentric shaft, and here's the actual intake camshaft. But before continuing forward, I'm just going to spin it over and check to see when number 1's at top dead center, if it looks like it is in time, and then I'll just continue to go forward. What I want to do is manually move the the Valvetronic motor, and see if I can move the shaft, if it's not seized up or anything, and if it can rotate and move with me manually doing it. Well, to no surprise, I'm glad I decided to check timing in a raw form without the tools, but maybe everything I told you guys is BS, because if you look as far as the camshaft, if you see, this is the exhaust camshaft, and you see the basically barcode or QR code stamp. It's facing straight up, and the on the sides you'll see how the edges go up and down vertical. That is the positions for the camshaft to be when they are to be set in time at TDC number 1, which I've got number 1 all the way up. If we look at intake camshaft, the camshaft is shifted. It is appearing to be delayed because the barcode has not reached the 12 o'clock or straight up position. So what, as far as what is going on, I don't know. I'll tell you this, I had had plenty of these N20s. Actually, my first experience with it, one that kind of kicked my butt, was actually from this same owner. He bought one. It was crank no start. It didn't sound terrible. It would crank, 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 and no start. I checked everything, and basically it was out of time, and it was causing low compression, but this low compression on all four equally. So it was still not enough compression, but it was out of time, and it had no codes. And I've had other ones. I come in, crank, out of time, blah blah blah, and no codes even at that point. But this one, it does not even crank. I can't even do a cam crank correlation to check. Or I've shown in other videos, BMW, the N63 timing one, where it would crank and run crappy. That one had timing codes, but then I could disable it from running. I could crank it and check in-cylinder pressures to see if the valves are bent, to see if it's worth doing timing or not. I can't do that on this. I can't check for valves being bent with pressure transducer. I can't check cam crank. For correlation, which obviously now we physically are eyeballing it, it's out of time, out of correlation. But I don't know why it's not cranking. Am I back to the same deal with a bad Valvetronic motor? I don't know. This is the first time dealing with this. Do we have two problems, or do we have one? I don't know. Like I said, I can't see it not starting because of it being at a time, because I've had them in the past where they'll still crank and try to run. And it can't measure itself while rotating because it doesn't let itself rotate. So something is cutting it from rotating as you request it to crank. As far as what I'm going to do now, I don't know. But I did take a peek down there. There is a broken piece of guide, just like a lot of these common N20s. Down there in the middle. So we do have a classic case of timing. It does spin, doesn't seem to have locked up. Do we have actual engine damage, like rod knock? Did the oil pump chain give way? Most of the time when I've seen that, they lock up because they run without oil pressure. So I don't know. I don't know where I'm going to go with this, but that is what I've got right now. Okay, so just wanted to show you as far as the Valvetronic position of where it's at. If you see that nub, it's all the way to the right, and it's actually sitting on an end stop. And with the tool, if you look at the gear, and this is just by hand, let's see, I'm able to move it. Get you a better shot. So I am moving it, and that's just by hand. So I don't think the eccentric shaft is seized up and bound up. I still do think, possibly, it looks like, we have a Valvetronic motor sensor deal that's just gone faulty and is preventing it from starting. At least that's the theory so far, even though it's out of time. So knowing that the that the timing went out and the chain guides and stuff had gone bad, I have no idea if the engine is good or if the oil pump chain has come apart as well, which, like I said, if they do, you won't have oil pressure. But I wanted to just get an idea if I could see anything in the oil or the oil filter as far as basically bearing material. And so far, I guess to my surprise, this oil that's puddled here seems fine, or at least normal from what I normally see. As far as the filter, again, I don't see any remnants of metal or bearing material, neither on the outside or inside. So there's possibly a chance that we did not experience any lower end issues. Again, don't know if the pump is good. And just little thing I noticed that I do often see sometimes, if you're not familiar with this, you can actually double O-ring it, which someone has. So the original place for O-ring is this here, which is actually kind of flat, so that one hasn't been changed in a while, and someone put one in the wrong spot, basically on the face of the cap, which it doesn't go there. So I'll have to take that off, and I do have a spare one here for this one that's basically flattened out, but this is the groove where it goes, so don't miss that if you're doing oil change, and don't double O-ring it. Okay, so despite everything, I'm curious. I want to try to see if I can get it cranking. I've got a new Valvetronic motor installed. There is the old one on the floor. And I've got the harness all set up for the same exact probes. And I'm actually going to try to monitor oil pressure if I get it cranking. That way I can tell if the oil pump chain is intact and the oil pump is spinning and generating pressure up here up top. I am going to go ahead and get back in the vehicle with the scanner to try to reset and delete and all that stuff. If there's any type of questioning if I get it to crank, even though I know it's out of time, keep in mind I have been spinning it by hand. I don't reach a point where I jam up, and the Valvetronic in its default is set to its maximum lift. So to the point of where it's out of time, to where it's traveled, which we could tell it was delayed. So in that delayed position, out of synchronization with full tilt lift, it's not been hitting the pistons when I spin it by hand. So I'm not going to damage the valve train if it were to crank. Even with that, not knowing the condition, but not seeing bearing material, I've already advised the customer that potentially is going to end up needing an engine. So one way or the other, we are still okay. So at this point, I'm kind of just trying to get it cranking. I want to eliminate that factor just because I've never seen it, and then I can take care of the other stuff from here on out. But hopefully this will get it cranking, and we'll see what that looks like. Okay, so at this point you can tell that I am pretty much ready to attempt to crank it. But just before doing so, I remembered that on other cars where I've done Valvetronic motor repairs, particularly with this generation Valvetronic, I've also gone ahead and updated the DME, basically programmed it before continuing on or finishing with the Valvetronic repair. So off camera, I decided to stop myself with attempting to crank it. I updated the program, the DME, and then this is where I'll continue to show you how the repair kept going. Okay, so I just finished the programming and went in to read the faults, and we are actually not having the Valvetronic one present. Obviously, we know why we have these. So I have the scope running, Not sure if I should try to relearn the stops or just try to crank it. I think I'm gonna try to crank it. Alright, it cranks. I just quickly wanted to point out a few things about how I went about cranking it in this form, meaning the state that it's in. You have to obviously watch out, make sure nothing is going to be getting wrapped up in the chain, and obviously not getting sucked into the intake. But more importantly, the fuel line, if you're going to do this, it's going to shoot fuel. Even when I was doing the programming, when it does DME, it likes to kick on the fuel pump for a decent amount of time at some point. So before I started the programming, and I knew I was going to need to do this when doing cranking, if I can get it cranking, I came here to the fuel pump control module, unplugged the supply to the fuel pump because you don't want fuel shooting out of that fuel line either during programming or during cranking. And lastly, to show you what I ended up capturing during cranking, and I didn't save the waveform, but I just did a quick screenshot of it. The oil pressure reading is here at the bottom. This is when I started cranking. This is still the Valvetronic sensor, but I know this was cranking because of the electrical noise. But one thing to note is that the oil pressure did end up coming up. Now this was, I believe, a second cranking attempt. The first attempt, it almost didn't build up pressure, and I cranked it for a while, and right towards the end, it did rise up. So maybe it had to take a few revolutions or time of revolutions to get enough pressure to come up. This time when I went for the second attempt and held it for a decent amount of time, the pressure came up right away, and then obviously it dipped, but then it just kept building and it came up. This right there tells me that the oil pump chain has not come apart. There is oil in it. It's bringing oil up to the cylinder head, up to the filter housing, and then distributing it up. So being that when I open the filter, there's no bearing material, no metal, nothing scary in there, and not even floating in the oil, and that we can get oil to come up. It actually came up and started going over on the manifold, and it actually shot some in here. You can tell it's a little shiny after I wiped it. So it's getting enough oil pressure. As far as cranking oil pressure, I believe I measured it. It was only like close to 2 psi, but I guess it's enough to come up here. If it's coming up the cylinder head, it's good. In my gut feeling, I believe it's worth doing the timing on this. I don't believe the engine is bad, and I don't know the order of the fault on this. Yes, it came in with a Valvetronic issue code that I believe was the true cause of preventing it from starting. But when we pull the valve cover, we see that the timing chain guides have broken and thrown the intake cam off. So as far as why it was faulted the way it is, I'm not sure. I bet or probably believe the chain guide and stuff went out first and threw off the cam, and maybe threw off or jammed up the motor in a position that wasn't expecting it to be jammed up in when the timing went off in the retard direction. It's just a theory. This is just what I've got on my plate. This is what I found. I've got it to crank. I've got it to rotate and bring oil up. I believe the customer is going to go ahead and do the timing chain, and we will get to see if this does come back to life with no issues. Okay, so off camera we got this all together. Obviously timing, everything's aligned properly. We cranked no start with the fuel pump controller unplugged as it was from when we were doing testing. Everything sounded okay. We assumed we built oil pressure. The plug's back in, stalled, so we're not measuring the pressure, but we did do the oil pump chain as well, the module down there. So fuel pump module is plugged back in. This will be the first crank start run that we will be seeing. So we crank. There it is, starts, runs, and drives after all that. I'm gonna let it run for a minute. So I've gone ahead after we've got it running and no issues. I pulled it back in to test the Valvetronic system like how it had come in. I am curious to see if we get any different reading from these other two readings that I took a while back. Before, I've got the scope set up, same channels, and I've disabled the fuel pump control module, and I've unplugged the ignition coils. I want it to just crank and no start so I can get sort of the same type of state for the Valvetronic system to see what reading it is when cranking. Then I'll get one while running. Okay, that's crank no start. Got some data there, and I'm actually during the same capture going to get it running, and you can hear that motor clicking. So it's moving into positions. We've got that captured. Coils are in. Fuel pump. So still within the same capture. I've got a long time base. I'll do a key on, which should move it, I believe. So just to show you the waveform of this good operating Valvetronic system, this was during key on only, but the rest look the same. This is when the Valvetronic motor actuates and moves through its sweep, and as you can see, it looks nothing like the previous two did when they were in its defaulted state. All channels are the same. The top three, green, purple, and yellow, are the three sensors on the driver's side. Red and blue are the one on the passenger side. And I'm not sure if you can tell, but none of them, even at this point in well-working order, none of them overlay each other perfectly. So what I was seeing and hypothesized, I don't know if it's basically BS and throw it out the window. And this is what it's supposed to look like. Obviously, we know that it's good, but I'm not sure. Again, I've never had to break these down to this level and try to figure out exactly what they do. But all I can say is that this is the difference between a good working one and the faulted ones. Obviously, the two before were when both were in a faulted state. So I don't know if that's what it reverts to when they're faulted, or they're faulted because that's where those were at when they actuate and move. But again, this is all that is presented to me and what I have in front of me. And when it is good, reading good, operating good, moving good, this is what it looks like. The two closest are going to be the yellow and the red, but even those don't fully line up well. And not even what I think are two sensors of the same. Apparently, supposedly, me thinking, hypothesizing, I believe the red and blue are the two detailed sensors. Yellow, purple, and green are the other three sensors. So, don't know again as far as comparison, but this is just what I have in front of me, what I've been dealt with. From faulted state to good state, this is what a good state looks like. So that basically concludes the complete repair of this X1 from the day I got it to the final completion and test driving it and getting it running. It took a while to do. I kind of spread it out through a few weeks. But the crazy thing about it, it's one I've not ever experienced yet up to this point, where it would sound like a locked up motor or a bad starter. But then when you visually look at the crank, it does actually spin a little bit and then stops. It cuts itself off. I've not ever had anything like that beforehand. Obviously, it was not happy with something with the Valvetronic. And then when getting past that point to find out that then there's timing problems, it just throws a whole nother mix into it. But it was definitely a cool one for me, and it kept adding to the whole complexity. But I was happy, and the turning point of making a good decision is finding that oil pressure come up. When we can finally get it to crank, when we fix the Valvetronic, get it to crank, and see that there's oil pressure, you're almost good to go to say that the engine's going to be good, especially without seeing any metal debris in the oil. And from past experience, knowing that when these go at a time, and if you fix them, most of the time they will run okay. At the end of it all, this one, when it was wrapped up, I drove it for about 30 to 40 miles, and it drove fine with no problems. Customer actually at this point, he has it, he took it, and he's fine, and he's happy with it. I enjoyed this one. It was challenging but interesting. I learned a lot. I was happy to be able to chomp to each issue that it brought up, and work through those, and just testing and being diligent and staying on top of it. That is all. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. I thank you for watching, and that is all for this one. Until the next one, hopefully it'll be just as interesting.